This video is to basically show you how the R2 to R3 converter tool works. You can use this to basically get a sense of what your case will, the changes your case will undergo when you switch from R2 to R3, or perhaps if you wish to downversion from R3 to R2. Here's a bunch of buttons. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the sample case button. What that does is loads a sample case that you can sort of a starting point basically, and it has data, some data rather, and you can use that. So you'll see that this is the R2 view, and for example here's serious, and I've answered yes. If I say no to serious, then the criteria go away because the case is not serious. And in the case of R2, serious is case specific, so it's here in the first tab. If this were R3, and I'll show it to you in a second, then the serious criteria will disappear from here and they go into the reaction tab because serious criteria are now associated with reaction. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to switch to R3 and you'll see the layout change. Now it looks a little different. And also, if you noticed, R2 had nullification, or the original submission. It did not have amendment. The other thing is that each of these controls have a tooltip that kind of shows you what that data element ID is in R3 or also in R2. Same thing with the grids, so you can see what the data is, where the data belongs basically. I'm going to go back to R2. And the other thing I want to show is here's a document tab, and this is basically connected here. So our additional documents available, A1 in R2. If I say no, this will disappear. No longer the document tab. But for the purpose of this example, I'll say yes and do that. Grids, by and large, all you can do is add a new record if you wish, or edit an existing record, and certainly delete one too. So same thing here. I'm going to add a new one just as an example. And we got another linked report. The next tab is source. Excuse me. For source, you have choice between reporter, literature, and study. In this example, I've added basically a comment for each, a record for each. And if you click on edit here, or you can click on add, you will see that the data can be edited by you. Cancel. Literature, same thing. Then there's study. If I were to switch to R3, it'll undergo a slight change. So for example, there'll be a telephone here, which was not part of R2. In literature, you see something else. Well, you have the ability in R3 to basically associate a document with your literature record. So in this case, I've associated a PDF. It's easy enough to do. When you click on add, in R3, I get to choose a file. If I want to see it, I click here, and in my browser, it opens up another tab. It may not work the same way in your browser, and all I do is click open, and it'll download the PDF. So let me just get the PDF, and here it is. So this is the PDF we downloaded, and I'm going to close this tab. And so study is there as now, but also study registration is there. That's only part of R3. This grid does not show up in R2. I'm going to switch back to R2 and move on to sender. Sender, this is what sender looks like in R2. And once again, you can see that all the tooltips are there showing you what data element it pertains to or it associates with in the specifications. R2 is R3 rather is a little different. The receiver sort of truncates the attributes. Let's move to patient, because patient, and I'll go to R2. Patient's a larger tab. So for this example, I have created a patient that is a child or a fetus or a suckling infant really. And when I switch here and when I click here, what I see is a tab called parent. If I were to take it away, the parent tab will disappear. It's no longer there. And the other thing that happens is, if I say it's a suckling child, perhaps, if the gender is female, well, that's all there is to it. It doesn't ask me anything further. But if I were to remove that, then it would ask me if the patient is pregnant. And if I were to say yes, then it would ask me for the LMP date and the gestation period when the reaction was observed in the fetus. Also, if I were to say patient is male, then there is no question of asking any of these questions, obviously. So we'll stick with saying the patient to fetus so we can see the parent tab as well. There's a question, is patient died? If you say yes, then it asks you for the cause of the date of death. It asks you to find and select one or more reported causes of death. And if you answer yes to autopsy question, then it will ask you to also select one or more autopsy determined cause of death. Now, this is where I want to, since it says MEDRA. So as far as MEDRA goes, this is nothing more than a placeholder. This is for illustration purposes only. So you will not find MEDRA here in the sense of the data dictionary, but you will see a placeholder that basically simulates what MEDRA would look like with the SOC and then hierarchically the HLGD, HLT, PT, and finally the LLT. And if you were to select it, again, a placeholder that says, yeah, this is what it would behave in a real world environment. And we can add multiple ones of these records for the patient. Now, when I switch to R3, there's a couple of extra fields that become available. For example, the free text for reported cause of death, and again, the free text for the autopsy determined cause of death. You also get the hour and minutes for the time of death for the patient. You also get the hour and minutes for the date of birth. They're empty unless you actually do select a date. Once you do select a date, these are available to you. We're going to switch back to R2 and go to the parent tab. The parent tab is similar. It's basically collecting all the information that is part of the parent entity in R2 and R3. The other thing that's common to both patient and parent is the weight, in the sense that the interchangeability between entering weight in pounds or kilograms. So if this is 75 kilograms and this translates to 165 or so pounds, if I were to say 81, it changes the weight in pounds. Similarly, if I were to say that person is only 160 pounds, it changes the weight in kilograms. And you'll find the same thing happens with height. You can enter height in centimeters and we'll convert it to feet and inches, or you can enter height in feet and inches and it'll automatically convert it to centimeters. The other thing it calculates is the body surface area based on the weight and the height, and also the body mass index, both for the patient and the parent. And under the parent, you also find the parent medical history and the parent drug therapy, which are again grids, so you can enter multiple records in them. If we switch to R3, we will see a couple of changes, nothing much. The date, instead of being of the precision of the date change, for example, the LMP date, instead of being a date, now it allows you to have year only or year month combination, or all three, including the date. And finally, here under parent past drug therapy, there's a new link or an option called expand grid, which was not in R2. So if I were to click here to see what that's about, or let me just edit it instead of adding new. The thing here is that you have the ability to enter MPID or PHPID. So when you can do that, and then so the idea of the expand grid is that if you were to enter MPID or PHPID, you can click here and it'll let you see whatever you've entered, and that will become part of the grid in the visible sense. If you enter data, it's always there. It will be used in the generation of the R3 XML, but from a visual perspective, from seeing it, you have to click on expand grid. Let's switch back to R2. And go to the medical history tab. This is the patient's medical history, so pretty simple. You can add multiple records of the patient's medical history with the disease, the MEDRA for the disease, and then there's a text box underneath. If I were to switch to R3, some changes. we get concomitant therapies as a checkbox, or yes and no value basically. We also get family history. So slight changes in R3. Let's move to patient past drugs. I'm trying to move fast and cover everything in terms of just a brief demo. So in past drugs, again, you get to, let me edit this. You get to pick the drug name, start date, end date, if you have indication and reaction LLTs. And using R3, you will see the same expand grid option, so you know that this allows you to enter the NP-ID or the PHP-ID if you should choose to do so. You can do that, and then you can expand the grid to see those. Back to R2 and reaction. So reaction is probably, for R3 at least, very, very large tab in terms of data being collected. In R2, let's just click here. You'll see all of those things that are part of the reaction entity being asked for here. And if I were to switch to R3, there's a lot more. I actually have to scroll over to get the edit button. And now I have a few more things. The seriousness criteria that we saw in the first tab in R2 appears paired with the reaction in R3. So it'll show up for each reaction here. And then there's the other questions and the dates and stuff you can edit and modify. Let's go back to R2. Tests. Again, these are part of R2's test entity, so you can look at it, and these are the objects you can pick from them. If I were to switch to R3, changes this somewhat slightly. So now I have a few changes, including the comment free text for comments. Tells you there's 2,000. We've only added 68 characters. If I change it, ups the count. Now I put 75 characters. I can add more. I'm going to go back to R3 and go to drugs. I have added 2 sample drugs. So what in our they're both for R2 and R3. But so when you have drugs in R2, so let's do this. You can see that you can track all the data here or enter all the data here. Action taken with drug. These are all the choices from the specs. In all cases, you'll find choices from the specifications. But for each drug, there's also dosage information. So right now it says dosage information, Zolarista. And if I want to do or enter dosage information for Altavicera, I just click here and this changes to Altavicera, and then I can work with Altavicera's data. So let's go back to Zolarista. And one of the things I've mentioned here is that adding multiple rows of dosage information will cause the drug to be listed multiple times in the R2 file. Because in the R2 specifications, we only enter one record or the dosage is part of the same drug record. And there's 2 options here, I guess. One is that if you enter multiple dosage records for the same drug, you can put that in the narrative. And that's exactly what should happen if you were to down version from R3 to R2. But in this case, this is not really a down version, and this is a very sort of a deliberate action by someone to put in multiple cases or multiple records for the dosage. So it will just basically create another record in the R2 file for the drug with this new dosage information. Let's go to R3. So R3 brings about some certain changes too. If I click here, edit. Now you also have the additional information coded, and that shows you these coded information. I think it says off-label use, so we'll say exposure, occupation exposure right now. It also has the NP-ID, PHP-ID option available to you. So if I were to save it, first thing I'll notice is the occupation exposure shows up here now. Also, the expand grid is there because of the NP-ID and PHP-ID. And in the dosage information, you also expand grid because we have pharmaceutical form and route of administration, so we have term IDs. So you will see, let's scroll down a little bit. So you will see term ID for the pharmaceutical form and for the route of administration. for the parent route of administration as well. So if I were to collapse the grid again, then they will no longer show. And I can always add a new record and put in more information, and the term IDs are asked for right here. The next tab we'll go to is the drug details. So there's a lot of information, data associated with drugs, the dosage, the indications, and everything else. And to make everything fit or be more visually appealing, created a separate tab for drug details. And here you've already entered the drugs in the drug tab. So you just pick those drugs, and let's say we pick Zolarista. And we can see that we can add multiple active substances for Zolarista. We can also answer the question about drug recurrence. In this case, it's basically asking us, did reaction recur on re-administration? I can also add the indications, and again, because in R2 you can only have one indication with a drug, deliberately adding multiple indications, should you choose to do so, means that it'll repeat the entire drug record in the R2 file. So it's sort of a bit of a warning, I suppose. Now, if I were to switch this to R3, there's a couple changes. Oh, first I have to select a product. So in the active substance, you can see that strength and strength unit is there, and as well as the expand grid, which if you click on, you can see the term ID is also present. And in the drug recurrence, there's the interval questions that are asked, and there is also a difference in the R2 for did reaction recur. There were only 3 options, yes, no, or unknown. Here you have 4. And I think there's mapping, obviously, between the 3 and the 4. And indication also has indications reported by the primary user. Let's switch back to R2. Assessment. So assessment is really, obviously there's a way they handled are different in R2 and R3 XML files, but from the interface perspective, there is no difference in assessment between R2 and R3. It looks the same. One of the few that do so. Here, you can add a combination of product and reaction, and then pick an assessment source to be reporter or company. I'm going to edit one of the company when I can show you. So if you were to pick company, you have 2 choices, global introspection or algorithm. We did not add the Bayesian Barty score, could easily do so. Then you type in the score, obviously. But here for the algorithms, there are 2 available as an illustration, the WHO scale or the Narahano scale. So if I pick the WHO scale and I'd say launch, this is the annoying part about tooltips. They show up where you don't want them to, but it was important to have tooltips from a learning perspective, from a demo perspective, and sometimes they get in the way. But anyway, so this starts at unlikely, and then you click on, as you choose, it changes the unlikely to, in this case, possible, probable, and if you go all the way, certain. If I were to pick the Narahano scale, and I were to say launch, then this would show you the Narahano scale with those questions and the associated scores and how that changes from doubtful to definite. I'm just picking the +2s to make it easy. So we're at probable right now, and I figure I pick a couple more and we'll be definite. Yeah, there you go. This is for illustration purposes, obviously, so there's no linkage between the pop-up score, which in the real world, obviously, you would want to save, as this would be evidence of how you assessed, what you were thinking, how you adjudicated it to be probable or not probable. Anyways, so that's in the assessment tab. Finally, we have summary. Well, not finally, there's a document left too. But we have summary, and summary is where the case narrative takes place, what the reporter's comments are. We have the sender's diagnosis, LLT, here's the measure button, that again, placeholder, sender's comments, and this is 20,000. But if I switch to R3, narrative jumps from 20,000 to 100,000 in R3. And the interesting thing about sender's diagnosis is that instead of having only one LLT for sender's diagnosis, now it's a grid. You can have multiple LLTs, and there's a new grid added for the language and the reporter's comments. Finally, you have documents, and I'm going to go back to R2. And documents are merely the list of documents. The difference in R3 is that you can actually upload a document associated with that and then send that document over to the regulatory authority. So I'm not going to do the empty PDF because I did that on the literature side, but I've also uploaded a JPEG file. So if I click on that, it'll show you what the JPEG file looks like, and that will actually go as part of the XML file if this were a real world case. Now, having gone through all these tabs, the other thing is there are a few buttons here at the top besides the sample case, which loads the sample case. The R3, or in the case of R2, obviously R2 XML. The CMs MedWatch are merely information in the sense that we haven't put those out on the web. If you want a demo, want to see how that looks like, by all means contact us. Happy to walk you through it. There's save case. So if I were to make a change on any of these attributes or create a new case from scratch, and I'm halfway through it and I want to play some more, but I don't have time and I want to save it, I can just click on save case, and what it does is it just downloads the case for me. Once it downloads the case for me, I can basically, in the download tab at the bottom, if I click on it in the download bar, it'll let me see what the case looks like, or you can see what the case looks like. It's mostly text, obviously. That's how it's going to go to the regulatory authority. But this is not an R3 XML format or the R2 XML format. This is a bit of a proprietary format we came up with only because we wanted to save both. We wanted to save the R2 and R3 simultaneously, because this tool is meant to basically translate between the two. So it's really text, and you could probably figure out what we mean just by looking at the data. The only thing is, when you look at this kind of data, obviously it makes no sense. And this is basically either the PDF or the image file, and they are being sent in a text document. So we're taking the image, which is a binary format, and changing into a text format, something that's required for the R3 format, R3 XML format. And if I want to load that case that I just saved, I just click on the load case, and as long as I know where they saved that case, I can easily load it. In this instance, it's going to be the download folder, so I can load my case from there. Sample case we talked about just has certain information in terms of what we were thinking, what some of the assumptions are. Contact info at the bottom. By all means, take a look at that. Finally, once you're playing with this and you're looking at the interchange between the changes between R2 and R3, it's probably better than the spreadsheet or comparing the PDFs and sort of mapping it out. But you still need some kind of information that is laid out, and this is what the last button does. Takes all the tabs that we have and lays out and says what happens in the conversion from R2 to R3, and of course the conversion from R3 to R2. So each of these data element is what you'll find on the tab called Safety Report, the first tab. And here it kind of shows you what it does. In this case, for example, the seriousness criteria, they are 8.1.52 on the R2 side, and they don't exist on the R3 side. So it says what we do when we are up versioning or down versioning, how we compare values to switch from yes to yes, because they have different, the text is yes, but the value is true on the R3 side and 1 on the R2 side rather. So each tab has that information. I'll pick drugs, for example, and same thing, all the things you see in the drugs will show up here and tell you what it does. Close. And that's it. That's all the information that'll help you utilize this tool to its full and figure and basically discover how R2 and R3 change your case. Thank you for watching.